wealth, power, and influence. JPMorgan had it all. He owned the first billion-dollar company and dominated the country's most profitable industries. The fate of the United States economy was often directly influenced by Morgan's decisions. With a mere word or a swift signature, he had the power to rescue a company from ruin. There will never be another man quite like JPMorgan. This is his story. Chapter 1. John Pierpont Morgan was born in Connecticut in 1837 into privileged circumstances. His father, Junius Spencer Morgan, was already a wealthy banker and ensured that John had the best education money could buy, hoping he would follow in his footsteps as a financier. Despite being born into wealth, John's childhood was bleak. He was a sickly child, frequently suffering from brutal coughing fits, migraines, seizures, and diseases like scarlet fever. His medical conditions kept him indoors, where he spent his time studying or reading financial statements. At one point, John was incapacitated by rheumatic fever. His father decided to send him to the Azores, a remote group of islands in the Atlantic Ocean, believing that the climate and salty air would aid in his recovery. John lived alone on the island for nearly a year. Once he was well enough, he continued his education. By 1857, having studied in Boston, Switzerland, and Germany, John, at 19, was ready to enter the workforce. Thanks to his father's connections, John secured a job on Wall Street at a banking firm that managed Peabody's interests in America. His job involved writing reports on American financial and political matters for his father's firm. John's father feared that his son was too rash and hot-tempered to become a successful financier and needed to learn restraint. In 1861, at 24, John left the safety of the established firm to start his own company, which continued to act as an agent for his father's bank in England. That year, John married his first love, Amelia Sturgis, a frail young woman who soon developed tuberculosis. Following their wedding, John took her on an extended honeymoon to the Mediterranean, hoping the climate might restore her health. Unfortunately, Amelia died just 4 months later, leaving John a widower at 24. Devastated, John immersed himself in work. Meanwhile, the American Civil War broke out, and John avoided military service by paying $250 to have a substitute. Despite this, he profited from the war by financing the purchase of surplus rifles, a lucrative deal that was unpopular with the public. Chapter 2. The Railroad Magnate. In 1891, John seized the opportunity to partner with financier Anthony Drexel, founding the Drexel, Morgan & Co. private merchant banking house, later renamed JPMorgan & Co. This firm would become the precursor to JPMorgan Chase. Initially, John acted as a facilitator of deals, connecting investors with visionaries. As his personal fortune and reputation grew, he began sponsoring many initiatives on his own, focusing on the American railroad system. Unlike other industries dominated by single magnates, the railroads were fragmented. John saw consolidation as the solution, merging competing railroads into a single, unified conglomerate. This approach, known as Morganization, allowed him to control prices and stabilize the industry. John was proactive in the corporate management of these companies, often restructuring leadership and insisting on complete control before assisting struggling railroads. His efforts attracted European investments, further increasing his wealth. John acquired a significant portion of the railroads, including a notable purchase of 250,000 shares from William Vanderbilt, and underwriting a $40 million bond deal for the Northern Pacific Railroad. By the early 1900s, John controlled a third of all railroads in America, significantly shaping the industry. John's imposing appearance, due to a skin condition that affected his nose, made him an intimidating figure. His reputation and influence grew, but he encountered resistance when President Theodore Roosevelt challenged his monopolistic practices. In 1901, after consolidating the Northern Pacific Railroad with other regional railways into the Northern Securities Corporation, Roosevelt's administration filed a lawsuit under the Sherman Antitrust Act. Although John fought the case, the company was ultimately broken up, marking the beginning of a tense relationship with Roosevelt. Chapter 3. The Man of Steel. In 1901, Andrew Carnegie's steel company was at its peak, and Carnegie was ready to retire. John seized the opportunity to buy Carnegie Steel for $480 million, agreeing on the spot and later admitting he would have paid $100 million more. John's purchase led to the creation of U.S. Steel, the world's first billion-dollar corporation, with a market capitalization of $1.4 billion. This acquisition gave John control over about two-thirds of American steel production. John also played a crucial role in financing Thomas Edison's electrical experiments and merging Edison Electric with competitors to form General Electric. Additionally, he was influential in creating what would become AT&T. His talent for combining companies into dominant giants was unmatched, but a crisis was looming. Chapter 4. Crisis. In 1893, the United States faced a severe depression. Stocks plummeted, businesses closed, banks went bankrupt, and unemployment soared. Foreign investors cashed in their American bonds for gold, depleting U.S. reserves. With the dollar tied to the gold standard, the U.S. government's gold reserves dwindled, threatening default. President Cleveland sought drastic action, and John proposed a private syndicate of prominent bankers to stabilize America's gold reserves. His syndicate purchased $65 million worth of gold bonds, and within 22 minutes, John's actions had restored confidence in the economy and avoided collapse. However, his immense influence raised concerns about the concentration of power. In 1907, another financial crisis loomed as banks neared bankruptcy, leading to mass withdrawal fears. Roosevelt, despite his strained relationship with John, enlisted him to address the crisis. John's strategy involved injecting substantial funds into struggling banks, convening leading financiers, and ensuring banks could meet withdrawal demands. Despite being ill, John's plan succeeded, restoring public trust and averting disaster. Nonetheless, the reliance on a single individual prompted calls for regulatory changes. Chapter 5. Legacy. As the era of unchecked robber barons ended, John faced increasing scrutiny. The American public grew wary of the immense power held by a few wealthy individuals. John testified before the Pujo Committee, investigating Wall Street's money trust and its impact on the economy. His deteriorating mental health and negative media portrayals marked a challenging period. Ironically, he had cancelled his Titanic voyage due to health issues. The Pujo Committee's findings led to the creation of the Federal Reserve, reflecting the need for a more robust system to manage the economy. John passed away on March 31, 1913, in Rome at the age of 75. After his death, his son continued the business's expansion, leading to the formation of JPMorgan Chase through various mergers, including the notable merger with Chase Bank in 2000. Today, JPMorgan Chase, with an estimated $3 trillion in assets, stands as the world's largest bank by market capitalization. While opinions on John Pierpont Morgan vary, his legacy undeniably endures.